Okay, so what sounds like a more effective metaphor for nuclear weapons? A lizard that is mutated into a stompy, mass destruction causing giant by nuclear energy, or a huge monster that was willfully created by man for the sole purpose of defending the earth by destroying other giant man-made creatures who went out of control while not being able to avoid countless civilian casualties? I'd argue that the first, embodied by the famous Japanese rubber suit monster Godzilla, is less of a metaphor and more of an over-the-top literalization. The 1954 Godzilla film may be fantastic, but the lead creature is about as indirect about what his violent rampage represents as, well, the violent rampage itself. The second is none other than the darker and edgier 90s reboot of Gamera, the lovable laughingstock of movie monsters, from film director Shusuke Kaneko, effects director and Gainax co-founder Shinji Higuchi, and Ghost in the Shell scriptwriter Kazunori Ito. Not so much an Elenization as an earnest attempt to showcase the true potential of the intellectual property, 90s Gamera makes no attempt to bring realism into the idea of a giant turtle that flies around by shooting fire out of its backside as much as giving it a set of genuine themes and heightening the gravitas of its monster battles above that of a plastic toy playground fight. It also arguably beats Godzilla in portraying the main monster as an actual metaphor for nuclear warfare, taking into account that mankind's use of nukes is commonly seen as the lesser of two evils, and not simply animalistic rage and destruction for the sake of it. While it may sound ridiculous to apply such a somber message to a reboot of a 60s children film series, known primarily for its lighthearted ridiculousness, it's not hugely different from the transformation Godzilla itself underwent. From a straight-faced horror film focusing on Japan's fear of atomic conflict to, well,
Godzilla says that I should learn to fight my own battles, you know.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The 90s Gamera is a chronological series of 3 movies. Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, or as it's known in Japan, Gamera, Giant Monster Mid-Air Battle, Gamera 2, Advent of Legion, and Gamera 3, The Revenge of Iris. Each film manages to work as both a self-contained story and a part of a larger whole, with elements carrying over from one film to the next, while being explained just well enough that it comes off as natural and not merely summarizing the story to the audience. Nonetheless, you should definitely watch all 3, as they are all quite good in their own way. The first movie starts things off as well as it could, with a gradual yet not boringly slow introduction of Gamera and his enemy the Gyaos, both serving as the aforementioned man-made weapons of mass destruction, remnants of a forgotten ancient civilization unleashed upon modern-day Earth. The human characters are not remotely deep, yet they have just about enough appeal to be relatable and entertaining enough to watch. This owes itself largely to the fact that their struggles revolve around the monsters themselves. This all culminates in the most pleasantly over-the-top and anime-esque action scene in the entire series. The second film, whose antagonists are a giant army of bug-like aliens from outer space and their queen, hence the name Legion, starts off even better. We are gradually shown the effect that the enemy creatures have on Earth, their influence on mankind's everyday lives being outright surreal at times, yet still making a strange kind of sense. The way everything builds up to the first giant monster scene is one of the absolute highlights of the series. What follows is very thematically interesting in that, radically opposed to the first film where the Japanese army are portrayed as thorns in Gamera's side, working under the orders of corrupt, even cartoonishly evil government figures, it's all about humanity and the military working together. Gamera cannot succeed without the military, and the military cannot succeed without Gamera. The third movie is a very different beast, and also features a very different beast as its main antagonist, both thematically and visually. In an interesting contrast between the old and new films, the human lead absolutely loathes Gamera after having lost her parents to his fight with the Gyaos in the first film, and through her hatred she forms a bond with the adorably creepy baby monster that eventually grows into the physical embodiment of her intense loathing, not to mention Gamera's most fearsome opponent yet. This is the film where Gamera's actions are portrayed as more morally questionable than ever, and the big turtle himself has to deal with the effects that his destroy the bad guys at all costs attitude has on mankind. mind. The real star of the show, however, and the most instantly obvious difference between classic Gamera and the reboot, is the visuals. What reviewers like Roger Ebert failed to notice is that there are levels of quality to kaiju movies, and 90s Gamera is not even close to being the same dumb, unintentionally goofy Gamera that we all know from the 60s. It's still a film about men in suits, not much regard is given to realism, and it's all still very low budget. But nonetheless, the difference found in everything from the quality of the suits and miniatures to the cinematography is staggering. Without coming across as pretentiously try-hard and still acknowledging the silliness of the core concept, Shinji Higuchi managed to give a level of real class to the action of the series that had, up to that point, featured some of the cheapest and most unintentionally funny monster scenes ever put to film. Higuchi's anime industry experience is particularly obvious in the first movie, featuring the most freewheeling monster fight scene in the trilogy and some shots that look like they came straight out of a stylish Japanese cartoon. Higuchi recalls an interesting anecdote where he was trying to draw huge influence from a scene in Miyazaki's Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, without actually naming the film. The CG animators didn't quite get it though, so he went and rented the film just to sit them down and show them the scene in question, telling them, "Just make it like that." The first two enemy monsters' long-range attacks look less like special effects and more like traditional 2D animation superimposed over live-action footage, which is actually a great thing seeing as, with one or two exceptions, the CG is the lowest point and the most blatantly aged aspect of the films. In the very lengthy interview with Shinji Higuchi that came with the DVDs, the special effects director seems to have had a uniquely 90s CG is the future of film mindset. Even considering that the computer-animated 3D footage might make the traditional scenes look lame in comparison. Mind you, most of the CG in these movies isn't outright bad, aside from those horrible freaking missiles in the first one, but it sure as hell is not even close to being as good as their use of practical effects. Aside from a few rushed, quite out-of-place moments, the use of miniatures is fantastic. Unlike, say, the blatantly stuffed cardboard building in the scene from the '84 Godzilla film, the majority of the buildings that get torn down in Gamera are built and handled in a way that gives them a sense of weight and solidity. Higuchi bemoaned the limitations of suitmation and miniatures that kept the first Gyaos from being as believably animated as he wanted, as he felt that the ground-based fighting revealed too much of the shapes of the human actors while shooting the scene time and time again. In the final result, however, this is not at all an issue. The buildings cover up the less than flattering parts of the suits while also giving the monsters a brilliant sense of scale. In fact, the way everything is filmed is possibly the most important aspect of the film's visual presentation. Staunchly dismissing the claim that he put lots of deep thought into the way everything was shot, Higuchi instead claims that it was all purely instinctive. While this sounds like pure humility in the face of praise, it only makes his achievements even more impressive if it is true. The suits start off good in the first film and become fantastic by the third, Gamera looking as alive as a guy in an animatronic turtle suit possibly could. This rather high-level suitmation gives the moments where Gamera gets hurt far more of a painful impact and makes the victories all the more impressive. This Gamera is not merely a Nuke metaphor but also a character. As powerful as he is, he gets hurt and messes up and at times feels like a misunderstood underdog. In this regard, we get an interesting duality where on one hand Gamera is a metaphor for the violence breeds violence nature of war, yet on the other he is still humanity's only hope of survival and a hero that we inevitably end up rooting for. This gives the films a level of thought-provoking, culturally revealing depth that I'm not sure was even intended, but it surely makes the experience stronger. The series ends on a note that many viewers saw as a hook for a sequel that will forever remain unmade, or straight up a crappy ending. It's not so much about what will happen as much as getting the point across, and the ending of Iris gets the point across as well as it possibly could. It's not so definitive that I feel like a sequel would ruin everything, but it works well enough on its own that I can't really be mad that it's been 17 years with no follow-up in sight. Nonetheless, the future, if any, seems like it will be pretty good. The proof of concept trailer for the kinda sorta maybe upcoming Gamera film looks like it'll go back to a darker atmosphere, instead of following the cutesy look of the 2006 reboot. When you think about it, Gamera can be seen as a motivational success story. Once merely a poor man's Godzilla and a so bad it's charming little series, it eventually shows showed us that quality of execution is the most important part of the work of fiction, and that, yes, even a giant turtle that flies around by farting out fire can have an interesting story to tell.